Hello, bookworms. Welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and I have some great news for you. Finally, one of my guests picked a Jane Austen book. How did it take 24 episodes? Jaimie Morimoto is a writer and Pilates instructor from Minneapolis, Minnesota. When she's not grappling with her novel in progress, she's posting essays about her life's intersection with the patriarchy on her blog, Suddenly Suburban. When she can't sit still to write, she does Pilates. Or sometimes she decides to have pie and lattes instead, which inevitably leads to baking and a self-satisfied sense that she is a well-rounded individual. I mean, you guys, come on. Is Jaimie our people or what? I always love talking about Jane Austen, this time in particular because Jaimie and I had some hot takes on her most beloved classic during our chat. I can't wait for you to hear why Jaimie thinks Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is the best book ever. The indie bookstore of the week is Minneapolis's Majors and Quinn booksellers. Their main location in the popular uptown neighborhood of Minneapolis has been in operation since 1994, and it is now one of the largest independent bookstores in the Midwest. My guest this week, Jaimie, tells me that this bookstore is, and I quote, a magical, wonderful place. Majors and Quinn's tagline is a bounty of the world's best books assembled by biblioholic booksellers. Even though their author talks are limited for now, they're still holding virtual events on their Facebook page. They're open for limited browsing, but like all bookstores, they ship. And they have a beautiful and easy-to-navigate online storefront. Check them out at majorsandquinn.com. That's magersandquinn.com. As always, this is not a paid ad or sponsorship. All of the book links in my show notes point to an independent bookstore. Please consider doing your holiday shopping at a store run by actual book people, not one run by algorithms. Now, back to the show. Hi, Jaimie. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Hi, Julie. Thank you for having me.
I want to just tell you right off the bat how excited I am that you chose Jane Austen, because as I said in our initial messages, I honestly, when I started this podcast, I expected it to be everyone choosing Jane Austen and I would just have to shut the podcast down after 6 episodes. And here you are, 25 episodes in, and you are my first one. I'm so excited.
I am so excited too. I'll be honest, when I chose an Austen book and I messaged you and I was like, I'd like to do Pride and Prejudice, I sent you another option because I kind of thought you were going to come back to me and say, it hasn't been released yet, but I've already recorded a Pride and Prejudice episode. I thought there was no way it would get to be me. And I'm so thrilled that it does get to be me. It honestly feels like a little bit of pressure to do justice to such a wonderful book. But
right. You're going to be the representative.
I know. Oh gosh, I'm sweating.
It's okay, because there's so much to say about it that we can't go wrong. You wrote the most interesting thing to me about when I mentioned to you that I was surprised that people are not choosing Jane Austen on the podcast more often. You said, one, people lump Austen novels in with Ugg boots, pumpkin spice lattes, and a love of fall weather. They don't want to be basic. Or two, like vanilla ice cream, Austen has become such a staple that she is overlooked despite actually being fantastic.
Honestly, after I found out that Pride and Prejudice was available as a choice, I was just kind of marveling and like really, I spent a strange amount of time thinking about why it could possibly be that nobody had already picked this book, because I do think it is one of the greats. It's one of the only books I've ever read that truly, truly gets better every time you read it. It just gets smarter. It just gets funnier. There's always more to find. I've read this book, gosh, I don't know. I think I might have read it at least every year since I was 15 and I'm in my 30s. And I'm pretty sure like in college and my late teens, I read it more than once a year. I just like kept going back and I reread it for this podcast. And you know what? Stays good. And I do think it's easy to overlook something that wonderful. It's a very old book and a lot of people read it when they were maybe too young or they didn't want to be too obvious. I know I myself as a teenager had a phase of not wanting to like anything that was popular because I thought if it was popular, it must not be good, which I think is a pretty common adolescent phase to go through. And the fact is, a lot of the times things are popular because they're awesome. I love fall weather. I don't have Ugg boots because I need more arch support, but like I love fall weather and I love vanilla ice cream. We put it on everything. It goes with everything. Jane Austen goes with everything. She goes with romance. She goes with feminism. She goes with everything.
Do you reread a lot?
I do. I was quite a rereader in my younger years. It was very much books were like comfort objects where I would go spend time with my favorite character. It was like a cozy blanket. And in the last few years, I've reread less and less, mostly reading new releases and falling very much into reading the same genre. I like upmarket women's fiction. I'm interested in the lives of women. I tend to read realism, and I almost always read something that came out in the last year. So for 2020, I came up with this project for myself because even though I always read the same way, it doesn't always lead to me feeling sort of satisfied as a reader. It doesn't always give me what I'm wanting, even though I keep going back to it. I called it the 2020 Reread Project, where I chose 10 books that I read in the past and remembered loving, but either never read again or had not reread in a very long time. And I really just wanted to kind of stack the deck in my favor, that I would have some real winners in 2020 for my reading life. Little did I know how much I would need such a thing. And I was very surprised that some books didn't deliver the way that I remembered. They were still very good, but they didn't move me the same way, maybe because I've changed and grown, or maybe because I'm in a different headspace than I was the first time I read it. But boy, Jane Austen always delivers. I didn't choose Pride and Prejudice for 2020 reread. I chose Sense and Sensibility, which is one I've read fewer times. And it is very, very good, but it's no Pride and Prejudice.
I write in the front when I reread each of the books, and I was so surprised that I have not read Pride and Prejudice since 2006. And I was stunned when I noticed that because, and I think it's because of what you said, because it's like vanilla ice cream and it's so much part of our culture. I feel like I read it every year. And I looked at that and went, what the hell? I haven't read Pride and Prejudice in 14 years. But it just feels like part of my life because I see it on TV frequently, or, I know both of my daughters read it for high school in the last 4 years. So I know it's part of our discussion in the family. It's just so much a part of the zeitgeist that I was stunned that it had been so long since I've actually sat down and read it myself.
I know exactly what you mean. In fact, right before you and I decided to do this podcast talking about Pride and Prejudice, I'm not sure if it just got added or if I just noticed it, but the Joseph Wright adaptation starring Kiera Knightley was added to Netflix, and I couldn't wait. And I watched it on a Sunday morning, curled up with my dog on the sofa. I was like, I just wanted to see that interpretation of a story that's so familiar. And then you've got Bridget Jones's Diary. And there have been so many stories that are influenced by Pride and Prejudice that this sounds awful. And I don't mean it. You almost don't need to read Pride and Prejudice to read Pride and Prejudice.
Do you ever read any of the sequels or the takeoffs or the genre bending? There's a whole lot of Jane Austen time travel and all. Do you go in any of those directions, or are you a purist?
I tried it years ago. I don't remember which one, but I don't find it very satisfying. I appreciate the desire to reach for the world Jane Austen created, but nobody does it like she did, the same way that she had an incomplete manuscript that somebody tried to finish for her posthumously. Mm-hmm. You can't interpret it. You can't get her voice really. At a sentence level, her language is so beautiful. And she did it at a time where she couldn't use the backspace button. She just had it. Mm-hmm. She just had the goods. I think of those almost as being like frozen yogurt. Like, to continue the ice cream analogy, it's like, why would I go for frozen yogurt if I could go for ice cream?
Tell me what it is about Pride and Prejudice that grabs you so much.
What I love is how Pride and Prejudice has really grown with me. I loved it when I was younger and as a teenager, just for the love story. I was like, this is so romantic. Jane Austen invented the chick flick. This is the best thing ever. And as I've grown and developed, especially as a feminist, the more I see this book as a feminist text, it's easy to write off the desire to marry and to marry well as sort of frivolous. But if you look at the stakes that are established in this book, Elizabeth Bennet is in a family with 5 daughters. And when her father dies, their house is going to be given to somebody else. They will literally be homeless if they do not marry. And in the book, they play Mrs. Bennet's desire to marry her daughters as very shallow and frivolous, but it's really not. What she's worried about is very, very real. She's worried about whether or not her daughters are going to be able to live. Getting married for these women, these Bennet women, was the only game in town. That was the choice. And I think it's pretty radical that Elizabeth Bennet, when offered the opportunity to marry Mr. Darcy halfway through the book, spoiler alert, though I think, can we agree that you can't spoil it at this point?
Right. It's 200 years old. Let's assume everyone's
It's in the air. Yeah. Halfway through the book, he proposes. He is incredibly wealthy, and she's choosing to be respected and possibly destitute rather than to know that she will be comfortable and marry somebody who has not treated her with respect. She values herself that much. And that's amazing, to be in those circumstances and to still say, no, the most important thing is to be with someone who actually respects me. Like, you've insulted me. I'm not going to marry you just because you're rich. I think that's so amazing.
I'm so glad you brought up Mrs. Bennet, because I was really thinking on this read through that she is the one who I think my opinion ever changes most the older I get as I read this. And the most disservice, I think, is done to her in the cultural interpretation of her, because she's always so silly and frivolous and funny. I mean, she is played for laughs in the movies, always. Yeah. You know, everyone sort of tolerates her. She's ridiculous. But every time you reread it, you go, what else is she supposed to do? As you said, she and her daughters are going to be destitute if she doesn't get these girls married off, and she has no other option. Yes, she's mercenary about getting them married off. What else is she going to do? She can't get a job, you know, and your appreciation of her grows, I think. And I would love to see, I get that this is Lizzie's love story, but gosh, I would love to see a version that does her justice to what she really was facing, Mrs. Bennet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a remarkable story. And I see what you're saying about, especially in the film adaptations, she's played for laughs, but even Austen plays Mrs. Bennet for laughs. It's, oh, Mr. Bennet, you have no compassion for my nerves. And what does he say? Like, on the contrary, I have the utmost compassion for your nerves. They've been my constant companion these 20 years.
This was the first time I read the book and found myself really irritated at Mr. Bennet. Always before, when I've read it, I've looked at him as, oh, what a great dad. And you know, all of us bookish, weird girls identified with Lizzie and thought, what a delightful dad to dote on the bookish, quick-witted girl. But in this reading, I was thinking, you gotta step up.
Yeah, he's absolutely unconcerned about the fate of his daughters in a way that he's actually not a very good father. A good father would care. A good father would do something to try to make sure that after you die, they're not destitute. And he's like, oh, it'll all work out in the end. I'll be in the library if you need me. And he's completely and casually cruel about some of his other daughters. You know, for all of Lydia's faults, all he does is ridicule them and do nothing to try to help her be a more serious and thoughtful person. He's like, well, she just turned out silly. He's not a good dad. I'm not sure he's even like a good guy. He seems very self-centered in that way, that he doesn't care about the fate of his family.
I was reading a really fun article this morning, which I will send to you, and I will also link in the show notes. But it was an interpretation of Lydia and Mrs. Bennet, and saying that Lydia, she goes off and does her thing. She doesn't care. She goes off with Wickham, which was shocking. And then instead, Mr. Bennet wants to banish her forever. And Mrs. Bennet instead says, nope, I'm proud. Finally, I got one married off, and refuses to condemn her for her sexual impropriety. In this family, they're the two truly radical characters, because she's the one who goes, guess what? I'm doing what I want. I'm sleeping with who I want. I'm doing what I want. And Mrs. Bennet goes, okay, you're still my daughter.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was a really fun take on it. And that is one of the other things I love. This is the vanilla ice cream aspect of it, is that everybody has takes on this book, and those opinions change as culture changes. And it is so fascinating to watch. There's such a richness to the text that to watch it evolve with our culture is fantastic to me.
Absolutely. And how rare. I mean, how many books from 200 years ago do we read and think there's still so much here that is relevant today, that is interesting today?
Is this a book that you recommend a lot?
I think I almost never recommend this book because I take for granted that everybody's read it. I almost never recommend a book unless people come to me and ask me for recommendations, which does happen pretty often with people I'm close to, because I read a lot of fiction. And I'm surrounded by people that either don't read a lot of fiction, or they're more interested in poetry or essays or whatever. And when they want fiction, they come to me because I've usually read, 5 or 6 really good ones in the last year. I don't know that I've recommended Pride and Prejudice in a decade. And I probably should, because maybe people haven't read it. I'm falling victim to it myself. It's vanilla ice cream. I've taken it for granted. That it's as much a part of everybody's life.
To take the food metaphor just a little farther, vanilla is actually a very complex flavor. So it pisses me off when people act like vanilla is boring.
It's a very complex flavor. You add it to all of the other flavors in order to make them better. And you don't notice it, but if it's gone, like whatever you're having isn't as good.
How does a feminist read Pride and Prejudice?
Well, that's a complicated question that I probably should have thought about more thoroughly, given how many times I've read this book. But I think it really does come down to Elizabeth Bennet was one of the first characters that I remember reading who decided to value herself more than relationship. And I think that is a message that is still important today in ways that I really did take for granted when I was younger. I'm 33, and I often felt like when I was dismissed in my teens and in my 20s, it was about youth. It was about me being a young kid who didn't know. And I assumed that as I grew older, anytime I felt dismissed in a conversation or a business meeting, that would disappear as I got older. And instead, the nature of that dismissal just shifted to become about something else.
Do you have a literature background?
I majored in creative writing in my undergraduate, and you have to take quite a few literature classes for that. And I have an MFA in creative writing. I'm always much more interested in craft and fiction and how stories are built.
So do you do that when you read Jane Austen, particularly this one? Are you able to get past your joy of the story itself and look at it and go, wow, this plot structure is really fascinating? Or do you just go to this one for your warm blankie?
I'm able to kind of hold both at the same time. There are just some things she does that are absolutely like perfect plot structure. Like if you go, I'm about to be such a nerd, to Aristotle's Poetics, he talks about this thing, the recognition, which is the moment that a character learns something that they previously did not know, which changes all understanding and propels towards the end. And exactly halfway through this book, you can hold the pages up Mr. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth when she didn't even know he liked her. It changes everything. And then there's an inevitability about what happens next. It's like watching dominoes fall. Did she know it was exactly halfway through, or did Austen just feel that intuitively?
Like, do we know how stories work because it's something ingrained in us on a molecular level, or do we know how stories work just because we've read so many of them and seen so many movies that we know?
I mean, she must have known in some way, because there's no way you could just stumble into it by accident. But it's kind of intuition versus strategy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Your creative writing background leads me to my next question. I'm so fascinated by your Instagram bio. On your Suddenly Suburban Instagram, where you said, I'm a married lady living in the suburbs, and writing about how the patriarchy infiltrates and influences my suburban married life. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, this kind of speaks to what I touched on in how I felt like when I was dismissed in meetings and things at work when I was younger, it was because of youth. And as I got older, it shifted to being about something else. I got married close to 2 years ago, so not terribly long. And I was really kind of shocked at how the way that people treated me changed almost from the day that I got married, especially when my husband was there. So, for example, when we go to parties where we don't know people, if I'm standing by myself, people will ask me what I do for a living. They'll try to get to know me in some way. But if I'm standing next to my husband, not only do they not ask me what I do, they don't ask me anything. And it's such a subtle shift because they're still smiling, they're still being nice, but it's just to him. And I have to actively insert myself into those conversations to be included. And even then, I almost feel like there's no almost expectation that I'll have something to contribute, which is maybe a function of the circles that I've found myself in. I do live in the suburbs. These are often parties that are almost like networking events. My husband is a business owner. It's usually other men who have brought their wives who are also not expected to contribute in this way. But I'll bet you that all those wives have something very interesting to contribute because we've all got thought, we've all got interest, we all did something today. And it's something that I didn't think would happen because it's 2020. I did not expect that cultural shift. And for my role to become not Jaimie person, Jaimie writer, or even Jaimie Pilates instructor, which is also what I do. Like, that's how I make my money. I write my blog and my novel and all these things. I make my money through being a Pilates instructor. To me, that's very interesting. And I just kind of couldn't get over all the things I didn't see about the patriarchy in my life that turned on a dime. And then quarantine happened and I had a little extra time on my hands. So I'm blogging about it. And every week I take one little thing that happened or one subject that I haven't really examined. And I think, is this influenced by the patriarchy? Is everything the patriarchy? And the answer is kind of yes. And I thought we were past it. And I think a lot of people, especially around my age, sort of think we're a little farther along than we maybe are. And I think that's fascinating and a little upsetting, and that you can't dismantle something that you haven't identified. So I'm just sort of looking around and being like, yep, that right there, that's the patriarchy.
I'm noticing that a lot of women are noticing it this year, especially because the burdens of the pandemic are disproportionately falling on women.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost invisible. You don't realize it's happening. It's like they talk about the second shift, right? Where even in dual income households where both partners work full time, it is women who tend to come home and be the ones responsible for making sure the home keeps running smoothly, making sure there's food in the fridge, knowing what's going to be for dinner, knowing when the birthdays are, and if we've got a present, and if there's going to be like I guess this year it would be like a birthday parade, right? That's what people are doing.
Right.
Like all of these things tend to fall to the female partner, especially in, traditional heterosexual relationships. Many successful women achieve that success. It's not by really choosing one path over another, but by being absolutely dogged and unrelenting in being willing to continue doing what is expected. And then on top of that, keep pushing, gain that success. And that's exhausting. That is absolutely exhausting. And it shows that the culture has not moved as far as Instagram might have us think that it has. If we still need memes about how it's okay to opt out of having children, if we still need a t-shirt that says something about girl power, that says we don't feel secure that we have that power or that ability to make that choice.
Yeah. Oh, well, now I'm going to have to go on a binge, I think, of all of the Jane Austen, all of the Pride and Prejudice stuff. And we're going to talk movies on Patreon, but I am going to watch the movies too.
Good. That is time well spent, my friend.
I'll have to put this in the show notes too, but there was just a picture of Colin Firth as Darcy made out of cake. Did you see that? It was just a few weeks ago. Oh my God.
Okay, listeners would not have seen this. My jaw literally just dropped with enthusiasm. Like, this is everything I care about.
Right. Cake?
Mr. Darcy and cake. Are you kidding me?
I'll put the picture in the show notes. Yet again, the power that Darcy has over all of us is phenomenal. A lot of heroes that are set up to us as romantic heroes, I never got. Jane Eyre, Heathcliff, I was always like, why? I do not get this guy. But Darcy, wow.
And what's so great about Darcy is that he is flawed. He's actually like got problems. He's a whole person, where I feel like, and I might paint myself into a corner because I haven't read a ton of romance, but often when I do read romance, I feel like the leading man is too good to be true.
And I think the other thing that happens in romances is the guy's an absolute jerk, but because of the love of the right woman, he reforms. It is so unsatisfying. And that is another thing that makes this book so satisfying, is these two very prideful people, very hard-headed people realize, I acted wrong. I had the incorrect information. I am sorry. Here's how I'm going to do better. And they both transform.
I might almost contend that Darcy always had those positive qualities. If you look at the way he treats his friends, he is incredibly loyal. He is incredibly caring. And his staff, he's always been all of those good things. It's not that he really changes. It's that he continues to be both a very good man and a flawed person who is sometimes a dick. And what changes is their understanding of each other's character, not their character as it stands. He doesn't change. He's the same guy. That's not really how stories are made most of the time.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to do that. How do you write someone who's flawed and who makes mistakes, but who readers will still root for and like melt over, which we all undoubtedly do.
Yeah, you can't help it.
He's a dreamboat.
Well, Jaimie, this has been so fun talking to you. I could talk Jane Austen with you all day, I think. Can you tell our listeners where they can find your work online?
Well, my blog is suddenlysuburban.com. And I have Facebook and Twitter, but I don't think I've ever posted to them. If you want to find me on social media, I'm on Instagram at suddenly_suburban. I do teach online classes. You can go to morimotopilates.com if you want to find out more about how to get in touch with me. I teach group classes 3 times a week, and I also do private and duo sessions on Zoom and in person if you're in the Twin Cities.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been really fun talking with you.
Yeah, this has been the most fun I've had in quite some time. I would talk about Pride and Prejudice for just this long or even longer every day of the week.
That's why we cleared the day. We can stop recording and keep talking. Thanks for listening, bookworms. For more information on this episode and links to everything we discussed, please go to our website, bestbookeverpodcast.com, or follow us on Instagram at bestbookeverpodcast. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and you can find me everywhere as Julie Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on whatever podcatcher you use. Reviews really help our visibility to new listeners, and we are so grateful for everyone. If you want access to exclusive content, including extra interview time with our guests, advance notice of the books we're going to discuss, monthly curated book selections, and more, go to patreon.com/bestbookever. That's patreon.com/bestbookever to support us. Your financial support really helps with the expenses of running this podcast. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.